Number 1. The name Israel wasn't an obvious choice. Nowadays we know of Israel as, well, Israel. But before the Declaration of Independence, there was no name. In early 1948, the Zionists were busy fighting for their lives, lobbying international governments, taking care of Holocaust refugees, absorbing immigrants, and trying to build a country from scratch. But the country to be needed a name, and in classic Jewish fashion, no one could agree on what it should be. The conversation went something like this. How about Judea? Well, according to the partition plan, the mountains of Judea will be outside the borders of the Jewish state. So that wouldn't make sense. How about Evel, a biblical character whom both Jews and Arabs trace their lineage? Rejected. And not just because it sounds like some sci-fi civilization. How about Zion, or in Hebrew Zion, or Tziona? Because you know, Zionism. Well, Zion means Jerusalem, which again isn't part of the Jewish state in the partition plan. Ivriya, from the word Ivri, which is the name used for Abraham. Herzliya, after Theodor Herzl, father of modern Zionism? How about the State of Israel, which reaffirms the connection between the land and the Jews, aka the children of Israel? Bingo. And that's how Israel got its name. Sort of. Number 2, Saved by the Salesman. Did you know that in 1948, American recognition of Israel hinged on a traveling salesman? Let's back up. On November 29, 1947, the UN voted to partition this piece of land into 2 separate states, one Jewish, one Arab. Yep, the original 2-state solution. But the plan went south almost immediately. The Arabs rejected the plan and instead promised to wipe the Jewish state off the map if it was announced. Without international support, the safe haven for global Jewry would be doomed. The Zionists needed a friend, a big friend, an American friend. But it wasn't that easy. The US State Department was dead set against the Zionist dream. Their logic went something like this. The Arab world is not happy about Israel. The Arab world controls the oil. We need the oil. Bye-bye Israel. Seriously, that's a memo from the State Department, verbatim. Okay, maybe not. The unborn Jewish state was on the verge of instantly becoming a pariah state unless the Zionists could convince US President Harry Truman to promise to recognize the new country after it was announced. But it was far from clear that he would. So the Jewish agency schlepped out famous and eloquent Zionist Dr. Chaim Weizmann to Washington. Surely this gifted leader could convince the president. But no dice. Truman had become so frustrated with the endless Zionist lobbying that he banned any more meetings with Zionist leaders. In order to get Weizmann through the door, the Jews needed a man on the inside. That man was Eddie Jacobson, a Jewish traveling salesman who just so happened to be Truman's old army buddy with open access to the Oval Office. Reportedly, Eddie sat the president down and gave him a serious talking to about his refusal to meet Weizmann, who he called the greatest Jew alive. That greatest Jew alive managed to convince Truman to recognize the Jewish state. And the rest is history, all thanks to a Jewish traveling salesman from Missouri. Number 3, Czechoslovakia to the rescue. Did you know that the Jewish state got its weapons from a country that no longer exists? Before the Declaration of Independence, every Jew in Palestine knew that war was coming, and they knew that they didn't have a prayer of winning without weapons. But the US had instituted an arms embargo against the Jewish state and cracked down on American citizens who tried to smuggle weapons across the ocean. Yikes! Salvation came from the unlikeliest of places, a country with a history almost as complicated as Israel's. Czechoslovakia was created in 1918, disassembled in World War II, reformed in 1946, and split for good in 1992. All this instability left a 2-year-old country desperate for cash, so they struck a deal with the Jews and with the Arabs, selling weapons to both the Zionists and the Syrian Arab Liberation Army. These weapon shipments to Israel were critical and saved the Jewish state from annihilation. And the shipments to the Arabs? At first the Haganah, the Jewish defense organization prior to the IDF, tried sinking the ship carrying the weapons. But the weapons were salvaged and put back on a ship headed to Syria. So the Haganah decided to teach the Syrians a lesson in Israeli chutzpah. The tiny Jewish navy seized the ship, and the Israelis ended up shooting the Syrians with their own weapons. Number 4, an unprecedented return home. Israel's Declaration of Independence marked the first time that an exiled people successfully returned to their homeland en masse. Throughout history, empires have conquered smaller civilizations, wiping them out either by force or assimilation. Even many mighty empires have been lost to history. But the Jews, a tiny stateless nation, managed to survive, much to everyone's astonishment. 300 years ago, when the French king Louis XIV asked the famous philosopher Pascal to prove the existence of a supernatural force, Pascal responded, "Why, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews." Pascal never dreamed that this unlikely group of survivors would one day return home, build a state, fend off powerful invading armies, and go from an ancient tribe to a high-tech powerhouse. But you know who did? Theodor Herzl. If you will it, it is no dream. Number 5. One nation under a rock? The Jewish state's Declaration of Independence doesn't refer to God, or does it? In the weeks leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, an argument broke out whether or not to include God in the document. Religious Jews demanded the Jewish state's Declaration of Independence include a reference to God. The secular bloc were firm that God had no place on the new state's founding document. Talk about drama. The morning of the signing ceremony rolled around and still no decision had been made. Future Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion spent hours negotiating with both sides. Finally, they came to an agreement, with the declaration ending, "Placing our trust in the Rock of Israel." This might sound like a weird compromise, but it's actually brilliant. Rock of Israel can either be interpreted as a reference to God, as in, Lord, my rock and my redeemer, or, as Ben-Gurion later explained, a reference to the Jewish history, heritage, and land. So what's it really mean? Rock of Israel only knows.